Three, two, one. All right. Welcome, Larry, to the Eagle's Nest. So go ahead and give a little brief introduction.
Hey, my name's Larry Whitmore.
Can you bring the mic just a little bit closer? Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Larry Whitmore. I'm a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, currently working as Veterans Outreach Coordinator for Home Base, Florida.
Wow. Okay. So how long did you serve in the Air Force?
So overall military was 26 years. It was a combination of I went in the Army, enlisted guy right out of high school.
Nice.
Went in for the college money.
Mm-hmm.
Separated from active duty, spent a little time in the National Guard while I was in college, and then once I graduated from college, I was accepted by the Air Force's Officer Training School, and went that direction. So the career span, so the career spanned 26 years from 1990 to 2016. So I've been retired for almost 7 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
My father, he was in the Army 20 years, CW4, and he flew helicopters. He flew OH-58s.
Oh, yeah?
Yep. I know a little bit of, I feel like for service members, once you kind of reach a certain amount of time inside the military, you kind of you pass like a threshold. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, that's very interesting. So, let's start at the beginning. So, you wanted to join the military just for the money, like?
Kind of, externally, like if somebody was asking, like when you're a junior and senior and everybody's like, hey, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go to college? I was a really mediocre student, didn't really like college.
Yeah, it's not for everybody.
Yeah. So one of the things that really attracted me to the military was my dad was in the military. I was born in Germany while my dad was in the military. So, So growing up, when I would visit my dad, I would hear these stories of him being in Germany and all of this stuff. And so his dad was in the Army, and then his dad's dad was in the Army. So it's kind of like the thing to do, right?
Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
And so once I started, pushing up against graduation, I knew that I grew up in rural West Virginia, and I wasn't a great student, and we didn't have a lot of money. And so I knew that if I would have went to college, I didn't really know what I wanted to go to college to do, and I would have probably
kind of be a waste of time.
Yeah, and my parents' money, because I would have taken out college. When you're 18 years old, you take out student loans. Your parents are paying those back until you. Yeah. So anyway, so the Army at the time was one of the only branches of the service that was offering a 2-year enlistment option. So it was like 2 years plus training. And it was a little over $20,000 for college, which now doesn't sound like a lot, but back in the early 90s, that was a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So
you started in just expecting to get out in 2 years?
Yeah, I went in.
Wow.
Just 2 years.
In and out.
Yeah, and that was it, man. So I went to basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. My first assignment was Germany. That was my only assignment.
Wow.
So I spent 2 years in Germany, and then I ETS'd out of the Army and moved back home to southern West Virginia, and then tried to figure out, what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, how I was going to go to college, what was going to work, what was I going to do, and so, but that initial step, I can look back now, and I had a pretty successful career, and it seemed like I made all of these good choices or whatnot. But if you go back into the mind of that 16, 17-year-old kid, I was just like, just kind of whittling around in the dark, trying to figure out the best thing to do. I was just very blessed that what I did do provided me some opportunities on the back end with the college money that I could come home and I could go to school.
Of course. So how was your time in Germany? What did you exactly do there?
Yeah, so when I went in the Army, I was my MOS was a 19 kilo, which is a M1A1 armored crew member at Tanker. Yeah, so interesting story on that. It's like, a lot of folks say, how did you get into tanks? Or how did
you don't hear of like tank units very often now.
Yeah, and so the interesting thing was, and this is again just how just dumb luck lined up for me, is a lot of folks are saying, hey, I want to go in the Army and I want to be infantry. Rambo was big at that time or whatnot.
Yep.
I really wasn't like that, and so as we're heading over there, I look at the recruiter, and the recruiter was like, well, what job are you going to pick? As we went over, and I said, I don't know. Well, what did you do? And the recruiter was like, well, I was a tanker. And I was like, well, what does a tanker do? Yeah. So, you got to think that, your decision matrix when you're that old, 17 years old, and you're trying to, figure out your life, it's not, your decision matrix isn't, really refined.
Yeah.
I made a commitment to the U.S. government for a job based on a conversation I had 15 minutes before I went into MEPS and signed up. So it's like, hey, how'd you pick that job or whatnot? So I went in there, and fortunately for the 2-year option, they were only giving that out to combat arms folks at the time, which was infantry, artillery, I think air defense artillery, armor.
Yeah.
Something combat related, of which, being a tanker kind of fell into. So I kind of just fell into the job. If I would have thought about it, I would have probably, I don't know what I would have picked.
Yeah.
I just knew that I wanted to do something cool.
Of course, yeah.
And it just ended up being with tanks.
Yeah.
But
I feel like for certain things like that, things that kind of you just fall into, based on a conversation, like you were saying, how did I get a job based on just a conversation that I had? But, I feel like those are kind of the best opportunities that you get, because there's such chance encounters that ultimately it's like the butterfly effect. Yeah. So start with a conversation and it ends up being your career for 2 years.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And then through that career, I had some really cool opportunities too, because like I said, I was born in Germany. And so, we graduate basic training, and all of us get orders to Germany. Now, you got to think about when I graduated, or when I went to basic training, and was in the fall of 1990.
Okay.
You're probably a little too young to remember, but in August of that year is when Hussein and Iraq invaded Kuwait. So by the time I went to basic training, they had already begun the buildup for what ultimately became Desert Storm.
Okay.
And so I remember when I told my mom what I was going to do, and she's like, "You did what?" Because she's thinking that in Saddam Hussein's on the news, and he's saying, it's the mother of all tank battles. You're going to die in a lake of fire and all of this stuff. And so I'm
going to be a tanker.
Exactly. And then my mom, of course, is just like, what could you have made a more ridiculous decision at the time? But out of that, so we all graduated from Fort Knox, and they sent us to Germany. I got to Germany in 91, and just some of the cool interchanges that I had by being in Germany. Now, big picture wise, why did they send us all to Germany? I think it was because if they needed replacement tankers, having them forward deployed to Europe would be the best place to pull that from. Because by the time I got into Germany, most of the forces were already postured for what ultimately would become Desert Storm, which I believe in. You can Google my history check here, but I want to say it was middle of, it's around Valentine's Day of 91. Huh. So I got there January 91. But the cool thing is the very first night that I'm in Germany, I spent the night in the same barracks that my dad was stationed in.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but my
when did you find out about that?
Oh, it was that day. I didn't know. Yeah, because I walked in, and the way that it worked back then was you get off the plane and they send you to this replacement battalion. Yeah. And you're all just standing in a big group, and they come in and they say, if I call your name, go over here. If I call your name, go over here. And we all went in these groups, and what happened to me was I got put in the 8th Infantry Division bucket. Well, 8th Infantry Division headquarters was in Bad Kreuznach, which is where I was born. Wow. And that's where my dad was stationed. So the first night you go to your division headquarters, and then the next day they farm you out to ultimately your units, because they had units all over Germany. Right. Mine ended up being bomb holder. So when they told me that I was going to Bad Kreuznach, of course the gears started. I was like, "Oh, that was where I was born. My dad was there." Now you got to think, this is before the internet and cell phones, so I can't call somebody and verify any of this. But I just remember my dad always was talk about Rose Barracks. Rose Barracks is where I stayed, and no shit, there I was. Can I swear?
We'll edit it in post.
Oh, okay, all right, okay, yeah. So, and then
no worries.
And then, no joke, my dad, there I am. I'm looking at Rose Barracks, the sign for Rose Barracks. Wow. And I'm like, oh man, this is super cool. So, I had that moment. Now my ditzy 18-year-old moment was also that I didn't get one picture of me during that time. So it was just an experience where when I look back on it, that almost like strengthens that experience because I can remember it in the way that I have to vocalize it to share it. It's not like a picture that's going around. For me to pass that on, I have to tell that story and engage with my family or whatever to do that.
It's that emotion that you're touching back into from that memory that you experienced. Like from that moment that you experienced, there was a surge of feelings that you had. So every time you remember it now, that's the only way you can actually bring that event back is by remembering it and remembering the memories.
Absolutely. And so when I think back on that moment, I'm just like, what dominoes had to fall to get me to that moment where my first night in country, my very first assignment as a military member is the same place that my dad was stationed. So
it's tricky. It's weird stuff like that. That's just how the world works. And my dad, he has a lot of stories that he tells me. This is actually his stories were kind of the reason why I wanted to start this podcast. Was because he had just a proliferant background in his service, and just his life was just crazy. He got like arrested when he was 6 years old. I enjoy hearing, the crazy situations and, the, like, how could this have been possible kind of situations that, you're telling me, my dad has told me, all the other service members with their stories, it's crazy to hear, unreal events because, I don't know, trying to realize it is just like, it's like, wow, like you experienced that, like how, I can't even imagine what that would have been like.
So, but that was just my first day in country. So, the next day I got on the bus and they sent me to Baumholder, which is southwestern Germany, probably about an hour and a half from the French border. And I spent 2 years there before coming back home.
What did you hate the most about being a tanker?
About being a tanker, I tell you the realization that I had when I knew that I picked a good job was when we rode everywhere. I didn't walk anywhere. So that was the good thing about being a tanker is it's just like, we're gonna ride. I always had a seat on the vehicle.
Boys later.
So it was. So I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the camaraderie, So and with any unit, you had the unit cohesion, but then you had like your platoon, but then like your element, that tank crew that you're with. I enjoyed that camaraderie. I'm trying to thinking about like the worst parts of it. For me, it wasn't necessarily being a tanker, but it was just like being away from my family for so long because it was a 2-year assignment. And I could have taken leave, but I remember when I left, my dad told me, he said, if I give you one piece of advice, he said, just stay the whole time. Load up your leave on the back end and then just leave early rather than coming home in the middle and then you got to go back and leave. And in hindsight, that was actually very, very sage advice. But as I was experiencing it, an 18-year-old kid.
Was that your first time leaving?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So it was it wasn't my first time on an airplane, but it was pretty close to being my first time on an airplane was due to my military service. I hadn't left the state. I traveled a little bit, but I wasn't like some worldly traveler or anything. So
and not being like away from your family for
where everything
years.
Was like a phone call away. You couldn't see anybody. The holidays were really tough. But the tanker stuff was if all we did was shoot gunnery, I would have loved it. I would have probably stayed in as a tanker, realistic, but it was like all of the other additional stuff that you had to do, whether it was pulling guard duty or KP duty or just all this additional things that they had you do that was outside of just being a crew member. All these other currencies that you had to maintain and everything. And that was the frustrating part to me because I was just like, dude, this is such a cool job. We go out.
This could be so cool.
I was just like, hold on, we don't. There's a better way to do this. So I really loved that portion of it. I just didn't like all of the stuff that was kind of like just part of being in the Army, being junior enlisted. I was at E2, E3. I made E4 right before I left there, so I had no power, and so it's kind of like you just get towed around at the whim of whatever.
Right.
But and it sucks when you're in it. But in hindsight, you kind of realize why it's in that. Everybody goes through that. I wasn't unique or anything. So that was. But as an 18, 19-year-old kid, that was like super frustrating.
Yeah.
That it was just like. We were doing all of the other stuff outside of the cool stuff.
Yeah.
And I was just like, why can't we just do the cool stuff? So,
of course, being 18-year-olds, why can't we just do the cool stuff, man?
Well, what the funny thing is that since I stayed in and I became an officer and I retired as an 05. You see why things are the way that they are. So I have a completely different perspective about it now. But when I was that kid, and you don't have that perspective, you're just like, oh, this sucks. KP sucks. Guard duty sucks.
Of course.
The Army sucks, or whatever it is. I could come up with to complain about where I was at. But that was just part and parcel to the experience. I was blessed in other ways, man. Like, I'm in a foreign country, dude.
Yeah.
I got to German people, German culture, German food, German beer. We were centrally located in Europe.
How long did you live in Germany when you were born?
Very, very little.
Very little.
I think I was born in October 72, and my mom said that she left January, February of 73. So it may have only been like 4 or 5 months.
So it was essentially your first time in Germany.
Yeah, it's essentially, yeah. So, but like when I travel now, it still says on my passport, Bad Kreuznach. So if I go through the EU and I go through Germany, I always get that second look when they ask me if I speak German, and of course I look like a fake German. Because it's like, no, sorry, I was just born there or whatnot. But but even though I was only there for 3 months, like I was telling you, as far as me growing up and ending up in the military, the stories my dad would tell and my mom would tell about their limited time there really drove me not only thinking about the military, but in like that German context as well, because that was all my dad did too. He served 2 years in the military, and he was stationed in Germany the entire time.
What did he do in the military?
He was a military police officer.
Oh, very nice. And what did his wife do?
So my mom stayed at home.
Okay.
And took care of me, which was probably a little bit tougher job than than what my dad was doing. But
sorry, I thought. From what I heard, I thought she was in the service as well.
No. My mom came over a little bit after he got there, and then they got pregnant right off the bat, and which I imagine happens a lot for young couples in love, and you're in Europe. What else? What can you do, right? So my mom stayed at home. My dad, he had traveled a little bit. He had to do whatever police officers do at different parts of the country. He worked with the Polizei a lot and things. And then after I was born, she spent 3 months in country, but then she flew home to have a little bit more support because my dad was working all the time. And then my dad was like, hey, I get out next year anyway, so you guys just go on home. I'll move back into the barracks, and we will, and then I'll see you guys in 7-8 months.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of ended up, on the childhood side, and me getting back to the States and everything.
Gotcha. So, you made an interesting point. So, you were saying that part of the reason why you went into the military was because of the stories that your father told. Yeah. And kind of just his experiences.
Yeah.
So, and you're also mentioning how his father served and his father served. Yeah. So, would you say that, part of the reason why you joined the military was kind of just upholding, kind of continuing, passing the torch down almost?
I think there was a lot. I don't know that I was consciously doing that at a time. I didn't feel like a personal responsibility to do that, but I think that in hindsight that it probably was, because I would listen to my dad talk about his dad and what he had done and what my dad did, and so when you're young and you hear these stories about other people and what they do, you're like, I want people to tell stories about me. I want me to be part of those stories. So those were like the stories that that really impacted me, and so there was part of it. But then, like I said, I don't want to undervalue that I was not a great student. Yeah. So it was like I didn't have a whole lot of options. Like I probably could have gone to college, but it probably wouldn't have ended up very well. For me and what I needed to do in that moment, the military offered so much more. It was the growing up. It was being on your own, paying your own bills, and then equally as important is living in another culture and getting to see, and just the exposure that I got. Like I think we undervalue that too. That it was 100%. Just like I met people that spoke different than me, acted a little different than me. You know, they had different traditions and stuff. And that was so good to get at that point.
Oh yeah.
Because again, growing up in rural Appalachia, you know, it's kind of it's pretty monogamous. Yeah. It's a lot of the same.
I got
so when I went to Germany, it was you know, just the exposure, to all of those other things. I got to visit France. I got to go to the Netherlands. Yeah. Went to Italy.
Yeah, I'm actually studying abroad in the summer. I'm going to Europe.
Oh, really? What part of Europe are you going?
Grantham. It's going to be it's like an hour and a half train ride from London. So
wow. Yeah.
Right in the UK. And so, yeah, it's going to be my first time like overseas by myself. Yeah. You know, kind of doing my thing. So I can definitely relate to what you're saying, as well as, you know, you kind of hit home with that statement with you know, hearing people's stories and wanting people to tell your stories. Yeah. Or tell stories about you.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like, for me at least, because I didn't go into the military, part of me kind of feels, because my father was in the military, his father was in the military. Yeah. There was a part of me that kind of felt that personal responsibility of kind of, you know, going in the military and serving.
Yeah.
And so, but my father was just like, don't go in the military. I did this for you, so you don't have to go in the military.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I didn't, but I feel like I am contributing to I want to contribute to the military some way. Give that respect.
Yeah.
So moving through, 2 years done. Yeah. Got back home, and so where to next?
Yeah. So when I got back home, I knew I wanted to go to college, but it was kind of like I also wanted to like reconnect with the friends I hadn't seen in like 2 years or 2.5 years or whatnot. And so my peers were all a few years ahead of me in college. And so it was a rough transition, man, because I kind of went from being in the Army and doing my thing to working at a grocery store again, waiting for the semester to come around, and you go back to where you're basically you're kind of like
feels like a full circle.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're back to being a high school student again, except the courses are a little bit harder, because I was doing basically the equivalent of a community college when I first started, because I was living at home and then going to school.
Gotcha.
So it just trying to figure your way, man. And it's one of those where, you know, when prior to you doing something, you've got this idea of what it's going to be like, and you're like, I'm going to do this, and you lay it all out. And then, what is it? Mike Tyson says everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face.
Yeah.
So once you go out and you try to do that, it doesn't line up with this ideal that you got in your head. So a lot of it was just figuring things out, man. Yeah. It was like, you know, what do I want to major in? I tell people all the time, I changed my major like 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, that's exactly what my dad told me when I was getting to college. He's like, you're probably going to change your major like 5 or 6 times.
Yeah.
And I haven't gotten to that many times, but I've definitely changed it a few.
But the thing, if you think about it, like, who the hell knows what they're going to do, what they want to do for the rest of their life at 18?
It's
crazy.
You
don't.
Yeah.
So all I knew was that I wanted to graduate, and I wanted to do it as quickly as possible. So I jumped around. I switched schools a few times. Finally ended up moving back home, and I went to place called Mountain State University, which doesn't even exist anymore.
Huh.
And it was one of those where it was like, hey, I want to graduate. And they were like, oh, well, you can go into these programs. And I said, but I've got this much GI Bill left, and I need to graduate by blood. And then it narrowed it down to like 3 options.
Yeah.
So I ended up getting a criminal justice degree.
Very nice.
At the time, it was, at least in the circles where I was at, it was somewhat of a newer kind of a chic degree to get.
Yeah.
Especially if you wanted to get into like law enforcement.
Because this was when like
94, 95, probably when I hammered down on it and said, okay, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
So I went and I got my criminal justice degree. I thought I wanted to be a police officer. I always tell the story that between my junior and senior year, I went and I was going to leave school because the state police was hiring, right?
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, well, if I get this job, I don't have to go back to school. So I went and I took this exam and everything, and I did great on the physical portion, but I didn't make the cutoff on the score-wise. So I got excused from that recruiting class, and at the time I was devastated, man. Nobody likes to be told no. So, but it brought me back to my senior year to where I graduated, and in hindsight, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me.
Really?
Because nothing against being a state trooper in West Virginia. It's a very noble career and everything, and I know some people that have had great careers there. But in my estimation, and for what I needed to do, the Air Force kind of fell in my lap because I didn't do that. I wouldn't have even had this opportunity if I'd have got that job. So because I went back my senior year and ended up graduating, that's how I came to get selected as an officer in the Air Force, and then obviously went on to have a career and retire and do all of that stuff. So.
That's very awesome. So, but did you say you were in the National Guard?
Yeah, I spent about a year in the National Guard while I was there.
Was that before or after?
No, that was during college.
Oh, it was during college.
Yeah, it was during college.
Okay.
And that was tough. And
the
thing about it, and it's funny because later on, as I was retiring, I actually retired as what is known as an AGR, Active Guard and Reserve, within the Nebraska Air National Guard. But we were a blended unit, so it was kind of like I was on active duty, but I was working for the National Guard.
You were retired, but
yeah. Well, no. I retired out of the Air National Guard.
Okay.
But it was but I was pulling full-time duty that I was eligible for. So I tell you that to give you some context, because I was in the National Guard, did the part-time thing. And it just wasn't for me, man.
Yeah.
Because I'm either doing it or I'm not. And I can't be a fraternity guy during the week
juggle all that
and
around.
then turn around and put a uniform on and do so it was a bad fit for me. I was probably a terrible soldier for the unit. It just wasn't on my radar, other than I was getting paid a little bit.
Yeah.
I was able to, do some stuff, some cool stuff. But it was really a bad fit for both me and the unit at the time. So I left. I did a try-1 in the Guard, came back to school and just did the full-time thing. Now moving full circle, like as I was retiring and I was actually in leadership positions within the Air National Guard, I had mad respect for those folks that would do that. Like we had folks that would retire as traditional guardsmen, and I would see like they would have family, full-time civilian career, hit the pause button, deploy as a military member, maintain all of their currencies and everything, and then at the end of that deployment, boom, hit the play button and go right back to being a civilian again. And just seeing that integration for the Guard service members, and the difference between that and the active duty. And it's not one's better than the other or anything like that. But with the active duty, it's just like this continuity. You that's your full-time job. You deploy, you come back, you've got all this support structure around you because you're an active duty service member, right? Where the Guard, it's kind of like they're plucking you out of the community, and you're putting on your uniform, you're training, you're deploying, and you come back, and then you go back to your civilian job again. So it's just not the same. And I would watch our servicemen and women do that, and I was just always impressed because I knew what I did when I had the opportunity to serve, in those part-time roles, and just watching some of the amazing things they did was incredible. And it just kind of like made it so much a richer and more important experience for me to be in charge of folks that were going out doing great things like that.
Of course. Give me just a moment. Yep. I think there's something wrong with the camera. Good thing I got that. Okay. So let's talk about the opportunity that you were able to get with the Air Force.
Yeah.
So how did that come up?
Man, this is even crazier. Was so I go back to school, and I didn't really know what I was going to do that senior year. I just knew that I didn't make the cut for the state police, and I go back to school. And about November, my fall semester, a buddy of mine who had graduated a few years earlier, and we were fraternity buddies, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to take this Air Force officer test. Do you want to take it with me?" And I was just like, "Okay, I'll do that." So for whatever reason, I'm a pretty good standardized test taker. I don't know why. I don't think I have above average. I don't know what it is, but so we both took the exam, and I scored really good on the exam. And the recruiter calls me, and he was just like, "Hey, would you like to fly?" And one of the things that I did, and I'd always assumed, is I didn't have 20/20 vision.
Yeah.
So I told him, I was just like, "Well, I said, I just want to get in front of this. I don't want to try something and then get disqualified later. I don't have 20/20 vision." He said, "Well, you don't have to be a pilot. You can be a navigator." And I said, "Okay, let's do that." So anyway, get locked and loaded with this recruiter. I ended up graduating. So the following summer, I'm doing my flight physical and everything, and I'm waiting. And the guy says, "Hey, I got some bad news. You failed the dental and the depth perception portion of your exam."
Dental.
Dental.
Got too many cavities?
Yeah, or something. I don't know what it was. And the funny thing was, like in hindsight, I remember specifically sitting in the dental chair, and me and the dentist were like talking about it. He goes, "Yeah, I've been a flight doc or flight dentist for how many years?" He looked at my mouth and he was like, "All right, man, I wish you all the best. Have a great career." So there was nothing in that conversation. So it was just like, what is going on here?
I didn't realize that doing like a dental exam was like
absolutely.
Part of it. Wow.
Yeah. So and depth perception,
the
visual portion.
Of course.
And I was just like, well, and then my recruiter, he kind of came back and said, "Well, hey, I can't get you in as an officer, but I can get you enlisted." And I was just like, "Well, I've already done. I don't want to do that." So I just kind of pushed this guy to the side, went down the road and tried to find other jobs or whatnot. I ended up getting a job with this lumber company. I moved to southwestern Virginia. I did it for like a month. I absolutely hated it. Absolutely hated it.
Really?
Oh my God.
Why?
Well, first off, I didn't know anything about lumber. Nothing. So I would have people come in and they would say, "Hey, I need a flux capacitor or whatever," and I'm just being facetious here, and I would be the guy that was just like, "Okay, what does it look like? What do you do with it?" And then I'd try to like help this guy, with their stuff or whatnot. So anyway, it was just a bad fit. Great organization, but it was just not the job for me, and I was really depressed, and I didn't know what to do. And I said, "You know what? I am going to enlist. I'm just going to enlist back in the Air Force." So I went and I picked a recruiter randomly, went in. I started talking to this guy, told him my story. This guy ended up he ended up being from West Virginia.
Oh, wow.
So he knew, I don't know if you remember who Randy Moss was, but he's from West Virginia and he played for Marshall. And so me and this guy just started talking about Randy Moss and Marshall and all this stuff. And the guy looks at me and he goes, "You know what?" He says, "I know somebody out east, personnel." He said, "Let me make a phone call and get back to you." And so I just left it at that. And I went and I heard back from him a few days later, and I said, "I don't know what he did," but he goes, "Hey, I got some good news and I got some bad news." And I said, "Okay, well, what's the good news?" He says, "I got you in and I can get you in as an officer." And I was just like, "Okay, well, what's the bad news?" He goes, "You got to leave in 2 weeks, and you got to be a transportation officer." Oof. So I wasn't going to be a flyer. I was going to be basically a logistics officer. So I jumped on the opportunity, left, went through OTS in Alabama, got stationed in Georgia, and I started doing the transportation job, and I quickly realized that I didn't. I liked being in the military again, but the transportation thing just wasn't my jam.
You wanted some fun stuff.
Yeah, so I was just like, you know what, I'm going to go take this flight physical thing again. So I went and retook my flight physical, and there was nothing wrong with me. And the guy was like, "I don't know what happened on that first go, but there's nothing wrong with your teeth." And I I had enough the depth perception to pass the test. Do I have a degraded level of that? Probably, but I knew I could do enough to pass the test. So anyway, that's how I got on the flying board. And so,
were you still trying to go as a navigator or a pilot?
Okay. I was just trying to go as a navigator and got selected. So I stayed in Georgia I stayed until August of that year, I think, and then I ended up in San Antonio for flight school, and then I did flight school for a year.
How was flight school?
It was tough. It was challenging, but I loved it. It was like I knew that there was a payoff at the end. I felt like I was doing something that I would enjoy and I could make a career out of.
Something proactive.
Yeah, and I felt like it was something I was good at too.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I was the best or anything like that, but it was just like I feel like I could be really good at doing this.
Yeah.
So within the navigator career field at the time, you could have, about halfway through, you could have stayed navigator, or you could go into what's called electronic warfare, which and there's several ways that you can get involved in electronic warfare. And the one that I got involved in was signals intelligence collection. So I left the I still kept my navigator wings, but the job that I would do, the way that I was coded, would be an electronic warfare officer. So I went to EWO school. And then at the end, all of us that went EWO and our NAV class, we all met together at the end, and then we all graduated and went to our respective platforms. It's since changed, and now it's like everyone just does all the same training, and they split you up at the end.
Oh.
But that's the way it was at the time.
So what did you learn in EWO school?
Well, electronic warfare principles.
I've never heard of like electronic warfare.
Yeah, so if you think about it, in layman's terms, if you think about the way radars work, and so you're learning like the electronic and physical principles that guide electronic data and the way that it's transmitted, received. How can you detect it? How can you use the things that you detect to locate things, identify things, and then build systems around that can do a lot of that heavy lifting for you? That like, okay, it's good enough that I can tune to a certain frequency and I can look at something, but what if you had a machine that could look at something and then match it against the database? So a lot of that. And so there's different threads of electronic warfare, but the one that I went into was purely on the collection aspect. So we would fly missions, we would collect radar information to be analyzed, and then we could also distribute that information in real time too.
So you're kind of more like reconnaissance.
Oh, absolutely. That's all that it was reconnaissance. So
very cool.
Yeah. So it was a great job. Long way from asking the recruiter what job he did, and I ended up in tanks to now being doing signals intelligence on an aircraft.
Yeah, after a conversation about Randy Moss.
Yeah, after a conversation about Randy Moss, man. So it's just weird how it all kind of played together. But dude, great career field, and
so you stayed in the Air Force for the rest of the time.
Yeah, so I stayed in the. Technically, yes. So what happened was once I started flying, you upgrade to like instructor and then evaluator, and then you go to like a mission commander type role. We call it a tactical coordinator. But then you start looking for these other opportunities like a staff position or do something that's kind of like outside of flying. So I went and I was the project engineer for our aircraft. So what we did is they sent me down to where we do our depot maintenance, worked with the engineers, and we would basically redesign the systems to upgrade it with current technology.
Wow.
So every 4 years, one of the jets, we had 2 jets in our program, one of the jets would come down, we'd upgrade all the avionics, we'd upgrade all the flight surfaces and everything, but then we'd also upgrade the reconnaissance equipment, and that was primarily what my job was down there. Again, the same guy that asked the recruiter what his job was, so he was in charge of this engineering, thing that was going on.
Wow.
I always told everybody, I said, a lot of times I found myself that I was the hands down the dumbest guy in the room. But I was the guy with the uniform on, and ultimately you bore the responsibility of the outcomes,
Yeah.
But so anyway, that was kind of like my staff job. And then out of that, I had an opportunity to switch over to the active guard side. Now, what does that mean? So my unit at Offutt, where we were stationed and where the jet stationed at, we had a guard unit that had partnered with them, and so we were blended.
Okay.
And so you had guard members flying alongside active duty folks.
Yeah.
And so what I lucked into was one of those positions that was full-time, still counted towards an active duty retirement, but I just happened to be working for the National Guard. So the only thing that I did was I changed my flight suit my flight patches looked a little bit different, and I had to drill on the weekend with the guard members, but the flying and everything else, it was identical. It was seamless.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So talking about, the upgrades, whenever you would upgrade, the planes every 4 years.
Yeah.
What's the coolest kind of upgrade that you've seen that you can tell me about?
Okay, so I always tell people my favorite experience in that entire job. So that job is built around that the culmination of your tour down there is you deliver an aircraft. So you receive an aircraft, you strip it down, and then you build that aircraft back up. You put on updated equipment, and you deliver it back to the unit, right?
Okay.
And there's other things that are in there, like you bring the crews down to train on the new equipment and everything. But hands down, the coolest thing that I got to do was so our jet was participating in an exercise, and to participate in this exercise, you needed a data link that we didn't currently have on the aircraft. And you were participating with these other NATO countries, so it was a NATO exercise. So I want to say there was the French, the Brits, the Germans, the Norwegians, and Greeks and Italians.
So
I think we're all involved.
Where was this happening? Like, did they
Greece?
Okay, so
yeah, in Greece.
Wow.
So, but everyone. So you can imagine that all of these different airframes, if they want to communicate with each other, they need a common data link.
Yeah.
And so the one that they chose, we didn't currently have on the jet. So our team, because we were the engineers, got tasked with creating this.
You had to create a data link at the NATO.
So, here's the thing. I always say this, and I'm way overplaying my hand here, but that first meeting when we walked in there and we were trying to come up with a way to do it, I always liken it to that movie with Tom Hanks, that when they're going to the moon, was Apollo 13.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, remember when the guy comes in and there's like an issue with the oxygen?
Yeah.
And then downstairs they come in and they dump out this bag and they're just like, okay, this is all the equipment they have on the board. We have to use this. Use this equipment to fix that issue. And so they're just like, okay, and they're trying to figure it out. Now, obviously, the situation wasn't that dire, but it was kind of similar. It was just like, okay,
you had to MacGyver this.
Yeah. So me and a civilian engineer, he was a retired guy. After they come up with the solution, we did some testing on the other aircraft that was at our location, and then we loaded this thing up and we shipped it over there. And then me and him flew to Crete, which is where the jet was. And we did the install on the airplane, and then we made sure that it worked. And the initial thought was that I was going to teach the crew how to use the interface, right? So we started flying these missions with the engineer. He was doing all of the knobology, if you will, where I was actually operating the box and then showing folks, how to do it. But what happened was it was just easier for the exercise if I just ran the box versus teaching somebody else. So we actually had this deployment that was to install it, and then they would ship it back afterwards after they used it. But we got extended so we could actually fly in the exercise and use this link and do this this thing, and then deploy and then redeploy afterwards. So when I think back, yes, delivering an aircraft and everything, that was great, and that was kind of like the culmination. But like the coolest thing I did was just like, okay, I've got to work with these folks to figure out this short notice thing,
being able
and
to
then deploy it,
and
then put it on, and then get to operate it and everything. So that was
applying your knowledge.
Yeah, that was probably one of the cooler experiences that I had.
That's very awesome.
Yeah.
How long does it take for like a data link for like that to be made?
Oh, yeah. So, it wasn't necessarily made. It was like we took components
And put it together.
Yeah. So it wasn't like a uniquely designed whatever. It was like, okay, we've got existing components and things that we use. I'm sure that we probably got some local stuff. We call it COTS, commercial off the shelf.
Okay.
So the way that the development has kind of really, really changed. It used to be that like if you wanted a box to do something, then the government or the military would build this box to do that.
Yeah.
Where now it's like it's so much cheaper. And equipment is
people just do it themselves.
You just go down the street and you just say, okay, I need this widget, that widget, that widget, and you just buy it off the shelf.
Yeah,
much cheaper.
Yeah.
So I think we got some off the shelf products, but it was really radio wire, a laptop, and something to broadcast with, how to plumb it to the existing UHF antenna. And everything. So it was just really cool to be part of that process, man. Again,
yeah, I bet.
I'm thinking because I always still see myself as that kid that
trying
didn't
to
know what
together.
Well, didn't know what to didn't even know what he wanted to do in the Army, and then now here I am deploying with like these really smart people that are doing these great things. So yeah, that was one of the cooler things, and that wasn't just for that job. That was like one of the cooler things that I did in my career. Oh yeah, wow. Absolutely.
Very awesome. So where, kind of jumping off of that, what would you say you got from the military after, all your experience? Because I think you're the first veteran that I've interviewed who kind of like went through the Army and then the National Guard and then Air Force, kind of like been around.
Yeah. Like big takeaways, I learned that my biggest takeaway from the military was just the level of gratitude I had for what it enabled me to do. Like everything that I am right now, the training that I've had, all the education that I've had is either GI Bill or I did it while I was on active duty and everything. And it was just like, if you knew the circumstances around when I grew up and then the opportunities that I was given because I had a career in the military, of just how lucky I was, man.
Yeah.
And also just dumb luck that I didn't mess it up at one point, and because it all could have come crashing down. But for whatever reason, I stuck it out for 26 years, and it's really set me up for success. And now as a retired guy, this knowledge that I have, I'm using it to like work with veterans again, and I can kind of give back and find that satisfaction on that end as well.
So, did you say that you retired as like active guard?
Yeah.
So, did that make the transition a little bit easier getting out now?
No, because I was married at the time to a gal that was living in it grew up in Montana, which I'm not from there. That's where she was from. So when I retired out of Offutt, which is in Omaha, Nebraska, and the goal is that we were going to just move to Montana, which was great at the time. But the thing is I left my entire network.
Yeah, left everything behind.
Yeah, behind. Missoula doesn't have a military base there, or a very there's some guard bases there and stuff, but I moved completely out of the military industrial complex thing. So there was a lot of detachment there, and I kind of figured I had to reinvent myself and figure out who I was and what I wanted to do, and so I kind of it was rough, man. It was rough, and I always tell people that if you look on paper, there was nobody postured to do better than what I did because, I was retired 05, I already had my master's degree. I went and got my PMP certification.
Wow.
And, so my resume was great, and I've got all this work history, and I've got all the credentials that I need. And, when I retired, and it was just like the wheels came off, man. So.
Did it feel similar to when you got out of the military, like when you out of the Army?
It did in a way, but I think it was because the first time I was so young, I had the future in front of me, where this was like the retirement. This was like the twilight of my career, where I thought I'm going to move to Montana, and I don't have to do anything, and I'm just going to ride this out. And it just didn't work out like that. And then you're just like, okay, my plan A is out the window, because I moved up there, and my wife at the time, we ended up separating and ultimately getting a divorce. I had a lot of depression and stuff like that, and it was just it was just super challenging, and I didn't have my in-person support network. My family was great, but they're in West Virginia. All my friends that I was in the military with, they're all in Omaha and everything. So it was a lonely time to try to navigate. And
did you have any support? I mean, aside like any support like locally?
Once. Like when I was still with my wife, her family was supportive, but then once we started going through our challenges, that all dissolved actually extremely quickly. So what I did is I started reaching out to the Vet Center and some other veterans organizations. I started working for a nonprofit. I started teaching meditation for a trauma group.
Wow.
I went and got yoga certified. I just started doing all of these little things.
Keeping your mind busy.
Yeah. And just trying to kind of like figure out my way. But like the culminating moment, like when I knew that it was bad, was I signed up for this program called Voc Rehab. It's called VRNE now. Mm-hmm. And the counselor, after she got my information, and I was telling her, what was all going on in my life, and she said, "Hey, have you ever heard of the Vet Center?" And I was just like, "Oh yeah. I work with the Vet Center some and everything." She goes, "Well, are you seeking services there?" And I'm like, "No." And she goes, "Yeah, I think that you should reach out to them." I was just like, "Oh, okay." And she says, "I think you should reach out to them today." And it was kind of like you can have all of the rational things, parts of your mind telling you, "Hey man, it's pretty bad right now," but you just kind of push through, dude.
Yeah.
You don't think about that. And sometimes you need that person at this time. I had just met this lady. Sometimes you need somebody just to look you in the face and say, "Dude, you need help." You almost need that external
influence.
Yeah, of doing. So I immediately went to the Vet Center. I got connected with a social work team there, and I still had some challenges to navigate, but that was really when I started getting set up for what I would call success. And what I did afterwards was once I got kind of like just some support and care in place and kind of get me moving in the right direction.
Of course. Yeah. So how did you get connected with Homebase?
Oh, so one of the first, Troy.
Of course.
And so what happened
is
when I graduated with my MSW last summer, my wife, my current wife, wanted to move down to Florida. She, we got tired of Montana and everything, so I knew that we were coming down here. And Troy was like the first person that I met online, because you meet everybody through LinkedIn, yeah. And the funny thing is Troy's originally from Montana, so we had this instant. I was like, "Oh, dude, you're from Montana," and I was like, "I'm calling you from Montana," which it was weird. Anyway, whatever. Events brought us together, and so we started having this conversation. And Troy was standing up his new program, which now he's the director of, and everything. So our first take is maybe getting a way that I can collaborate with him and possibly be part of his team, and that just wasn't in the cards at that time, manning wise. So, but we stayed in touch. I got a job with the VA when I first came down here. It was a bad fit for me and my family, for whatever reason. Great place to work, great leadership and everything. It was just a bad fit for me at the time. So I called Troy and I was just like, "Man," I was like, "Here's where I'm at. Hey, you got anything, or you know anything?" Well, he happened to know Armando, and he's like, "Hey, I think Armando's hiring at Homebase, and I think you'd be a great fit for this position." So I reached out to Armando and interviewed for the job, and I've been working for them for the last 5 months now. So
wow.
So yeah, it was just one of those things that just happened. The right job at the right time, and it's been great ever since.
It's those little conversations, man. Those little conversations will get you a long way.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. So, closing up the interview, I would want to ask, so just looking back on your service and everything, and looking at, the people that you've interacted with, and just reflecting on the military as a whole, what do you think is something that regular people can do for veterans, whether it be, in your community or just as a whole, and, what can they do better for veterans, at least for yourself?
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, I just think it would be just becoming more aware of of the challenges that veterans are facing. Like if you look at the veteran population compared to the non-veteran population, you know, we have higher rates of suicide, higher rates of homelessness, substance abuse, and these bad outcomes, you know.
Yeah.
It's kind of getting to like understanding what the culture's like and why that may be happening. And then the double bang that a lot of people kind of ignore is that veterans are actually really well funded and supported. If you look at, we have a strong VA infrastructure, we've got all these things. So it's not just, hey, veterans have this military experience and they end up, you know, having these challenges. It's like not only that, but they have this infrastructure that's necessarily built to help them through that, and we still have bad outcomes.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the challenge. So if I would talk to somebody and say how they can help veterans, is just be more aware of the challenges that veterans face, and recognize just how large that disparity is between us and the general population, regardless of the supports we already have in place, and our folks are still having some bad outcomes.
Yeah, of course. I completely agree with you. Like, that shows that like this problem is bigger than just trying to throw money at it and thinking that it's going to be okay. You know, it requires, active participation within both the civilian and the veteran community and the military community as a whole.
Yeah, the only other thing I'll add to that is kind of like the other thing that folks get wrapped up into is like, well, we're not at war, we've pulled out of Afghanistan. Well, those mental health and, for instance, like the trauma that veterans experience, that stuff lasts a lifetime. And the example that I can give you right now is like, if you look at our Vietnam vet population, Vietnam, ended technically in early to mid 70s, and we're still dealing with those. So this issue's not going away just because we're not in combat. If anything, we've got veterans that are going to be more postured at home with time to think about, I really need to work on my stuff. Because it's almost like when you're wrapped up into that rhythm of deploy, come home, train, deploy, come home, train.
You don't think about it.
You don't have to think about it. Now we've got time to think about it now. And so I think that what you're going to see is yes, we're not forward postured like we could be. We're not actively engaged in combat, but we've got a mental health crisis on our hands, and it is not going away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time, Larry. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, you as well, Nate. So, thanks for not only the opportunity for me, but thank you for what you do for our veterans, allowing them to get their voice out.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. All right. It's a wrap.
Dude, that was good, man.
Thank you.